Okay, so I'm going to start. Everybody good to go? Yeah, so hi, this is what does a UX designer actually do? My name is Jeff. I'm a UX designer, and I'm working as the head of design at CareerFoundry here in Berlin. On the side, I like to make design content, educational content at the Fountain Institute on Instagram. And yeah, for about 4 years, I've been working at CareerFoundry. And in that time, learned a lot about UX, a lot about what it's like for people to start doing UX. Done a lot of UX research on, our customer, which is oftentimes someone who's getting into UX for the very first time. So I can understand that UX itself can seem like this big scary thing, like this image from the Wizard of Oz. You see all the flames and all the articles on Medium, and there's a lot of PR and blog posts and a lot of information about UX design. But what I want to do today is look behind the curtain, because there's always a person behind the curtain who's working on the user experience of a product. So I want to go through some of these things today and give you kind of a peek, a lot of it from my personal experience. So give you an idea of what a UX designer actually does. But first, being a UX designer, I really care about feedback and asking the right questions. So I think a really good question to start off would be, what do you hope to get out of the session? And you can put this in the public chat. Feel free to go ahead and start typing, and I'll be looking at this, and then I'll know like what you're expecting out of this session, and then I can, if possible, adjust what I'm going to say according to that. So yeah, what are you here for? What do you want to get out of this session? Of course, at the very end, at the end, for a good portion of this, we're going to do a Q&A. So you can also you can save your questions for there. There is a Q&A tab, and I believe you can upvote things. So you can just type things in the chat, or you can also ask questions in the Q&A. And if I don't get to the Q&A while I'm doing the initial presentation, I'll get to a lot of them after, especially if they're upvoted, which means a lot of people are asking the same thing. So yeah, like, what are you trying to get out of this session? Understanding of UX and how to jump into it. Thanks, Steve Calhoun. Sense of how much technology does one need to master? That's a really good question. I would say off the bat, not much. So like most things, you can do a lot with technology, a lot by hand. Graphic designer to UX designer, that's what my path was. So be on the lookout for that. I'm gonna give that story here in a second. Day-to-day aspects. I'll sort of give day-to-day aspects. I won't say like at 11 a.m. I do this, and 2 p.m. I do this, but what I'm going to go through is kind of like the stuff I do in a typical project over the course of like a month or so. The track to get into UX design, better understanding in general, see if it's for you. Differences between UX and UI. Yeah, I'll get to that at the very end. Day-to-day, transitioning into UX design. Is UX part of business analysis? Definitely should be. Without a typical major degree. Yeah, I don't get into that, but I'll go ahead and say that design, especially in the product world, UX, UI, product design, it's all based on where you work and your portfolio, and less about where you went to school, although that is changing as more and more schools get programs, but CareerFoundry is one of the few programs that had a UX design program back in the day. So yeah, I mean, I think it's more about like, can you do the work? Have you done the work? What's your portfolio look like? That's kind of the things that people find interesting when they're hiring. Job prospects, interesting. Okay, yeah. UX research. I won't get into a lot, so maybe ask a question in the Q&A about UX research. I can come back to that later, because that's a super interesting area. Career path in general. Pitching your skills, that's interesting. Remote and digital work, yeah. Post-COVID, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely ask a question in the Q&A about the remote / post-lockdown stuff. I think that's a super interesting question. Okay, cool. That seems like a good start. Keep building questions in the Q&A, which I'll get to later. But for now, I'm going to get into the presentation. This is the kind of rough schedule. It may not always go all the way to 8 o'clock. This is Berlin time. It may not go the full 2 hours if there's not a lot of questions, but yeah. So just to get in, first of all, I do a workshop at CareerFoundry in Berlin quite a bit, and they always tell me that I forget to talk about what CareerFoundry is. So I'm going to make sure I do that because it's something I tend to jump over, to gloss over and get straight into. But what is CareerFoundry? We're Europe's largest online tech school. We are all online, which has been really helpful in the past couple months. We have over 2,000 students, mentors, career specialists, basically a ton of different types of teachers and a lot of students. We help people change careers into tech. We get them going in the fields of UX, UI, web development, and now data analytics. So these are all the rising fields. I think my mic may have just gone out. There we go. Yep, can you hear me? Okay, cool. Yeah, so what we do, we address the market's need for tech skills because everyone needs people to work in tech and there's not enough people, so we're trying to train people to get there. Most of the courses are 5 to 10 months. They're all online, and you get a team of experts to support you along the way. So we're very project-based. For the design courses, it's very based on the portfolio that you come out with. That's what we're trying to get you to because we know that's what you need when you start applying to jobs. Same with web dev. It's really about the work you do in these tech fields. People want to see that you've done it already. People want to see how. They don't want just a certificate that you have on the wall from the university. They want to know, do you actually know how to do this stuff? A lot of people in tech didn't even go to university, so that's the sort of like the way tech looks at it. Obviously, that changes depending on how you want to do things. If you're maybe more freelance or the field can be complicated, but yeah, we're geared up to get you into the tech world. That's kind of where our motivations are. This is actually what it looks like when you log in as a UX designer. So you can see you have several courses here. One is Intro to UX Design, and then you can unlock the full UX immersion once you finish that one. We've got the job prep course, and we've also got like an orientation course, a course about taking courses at CareerFoundry. So we've covered you with everything you need to learn. This is what it looks like when you're getting into a course. As you can see, we have things that help you stay on track. We have weekly goals. We have progress meters. You can book a call with your mentor, and you can jump into all the tasks that are available to you in the coming weeks. We break it down week by week, and that's how we kind of keep you steady and submitting because you're an adult. Our learners are adults. It's up to them how much they want to do per week, but we give you a suggestion, allow you to customize it, and we try and hold you to that through our interface because we think motivation is a big part of learning, and usually people who are trying to change their career are quite motivated, but we offer the tools that you need to get through these courses. So I'm going to start when you talk about why UX design. I think the best thing that you can talk about is through your personal experience because that's what I know. A lot of this is going to be my own experience, of course, that could be different. A lot of it will be maybe some of my own opinions. So just understand that it's a personal subjective journey that I've had to get to UX design. But yeah, let's talk about that, and maybe you'll see something in my journey that could motivate you and help you with your journey. So I started off at university getting my bachelor's in graphic design, and that was for me a really interesting learning experience. I had a really great teacher who really inspired me and got me into the idea of working on a computer, doing something creative that I feel like it could make decent money. For me, I wanted something that would be useful, creative, and that I could go home and get a good night's sleep afterwards doing this. So I was looking for a career that was creative, that paid well, and I wasn't necessarily looking into something super artistic or to be an artist and create my own work. I was looking to solve problems and that sort of thing. So architecture is something I was interested in as a kid, and then I got into graphic design at university. And then eventually I moved into visual design, so kind of getting a more digital version of graphic design. And then I started to do more and more complex things, and that turned it into a sort of bit of UI design, and a lot of web design involved in that. But as it got more complicated, more into UI design. And then my title was product design before I joined CareerFoundry, and then I joined CareerFoundry to focus solely on UX design. And product design and UX design are very similar. I can go through that later. But these are the kind of the designs that I went through. starting in something like 2000, 2008. I started down this path. But university, this was me. So I kind of brought in some images that represent my university time. As a kid, I was really obsessed with Frank Lloyd Wright. I thought it was really great how he created houses that the whole environment was art directed. They were functional and beautiful at the same time. That love of architecture and kind of wanting to be an architect growing up and drawing a lot, playing with Legos, led me to graphic design at university. And graphic design was not my passion then. That's why I love this little image here, because it's kind of ironic. It definitely wasn't my passion at the time. It's just like, it made sense. This was something that I liked doing, that I thought could be useful. So I tried to bring the architecture thing in and did these posters as my sort of like, senior project, and was getting into typography and layouts and poster design and understanding color and balance and typographic hierarchy and a lot of these things that would help me. But when I got out of university, my resume only had those 3 posters and a couple other things. And I quickly realized, I moved to Austin, Texas, and realized that there was a lot of future in digital design, especially like app design was just becoming a thing in 2009. So like, the iPhone had come out, and I was starting to see that like, okay, it's growing. The design world is growing in the digital realm, and I was interested in that. I always loved graphic design and making posters for my friends' bands and bands like Big Frida, or musical acts like Big Frida, and I was really into that. And in Austin, Texas, I did that for a while. So I did freelance for about 2 years. Tried to get some web design work. Couldn't get a whole lot of work. This one project I got for a church was like the only thing I could find. So I was just doing poster design. And that's kind of what my portfolio looked like after university. I had a whole bachelor's degree in graphic design and about 1.5 years of work freelancing, doing as much as I could. And this is about all I had. So no, it was not a bad portfolio, but it wasn't where I wanted it to go. So I started to look on Craigslist on the design area, and I was looking at this every single day, applying to everything that popped up. Because back then, Craigslist was kind of the main area where you'd find creative work. Maybe there was more at the time. I didn't have any family friend that could help me get into the tech startup scene. Nothing. So what I did find was an ad in Craigslist for a design intern. It was at a company called Mass Relevance, and out of sheer luck, or just really wanting a job, found that place. And when I got to the interview, I was showing my posters, but I was showing them on this iPad, and just showing the posters and some other work that I'd done on an iPad, it showed the person that I was interviewing with that I was interested in product design and digital design and UX design, UI design. So I didn't even have any actual, UX, UI product design projects, but the way I displayed it was on an interactive app called like Folio, I think, for iPad. I bought the iPad before the interview. I put all my work on it. I made it kind of a bunch of interactions where you could zoom in, you could go back. It was like a little mini app you could use. And that's the only reason I got this internship. So it was, I think, a bit of luck that I managed to find a way to get in the door there. And I interned with this company, Mass Relevance. They had a ping pong table. It was super cool startup. We had free snacks. I got to do projects with these really great companies. It was kind of set up like an agency in the way that we did work, but we were trying to be a software company. So I got to experience the agency world and the startup world in the same time. And this was a company in Austin, Texas that turned into Spreadfast, and now it's called Koros. And that's kind of where I got to learn what UX design is. So what I did was, we were trying to pitch, we were putting tweets on TV. That's how we started. So we were displaying social media content. So we were doing things like pitching this app for Austin City Limits, a music festival in Austin. So we'd say, okay, we can do these things with social media. How would it look like? And I was really lucky to just be given kind of a blank slate. So I'd say, oh, let's make this sort of, experience on an app. And we'd try and sell that. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. And then if it did get sold, we would turn it into a white label app. So this is kind of like taking a one-off project in the agency style and then productizing it. So making it where you can sell it over again. And then once it's productized, selling it over and over and over. So yeah, and here I was using Photoshop to make these things. That was mainly where I was living in. Photoshop to do most of my work. A little bit of Illustrator every now and then. But in university, I'd only learned Illustrator. For some reason, they only taught us Illustrator. That's it. I had to learn Photoshop on my own. I learned it on YouTube using this really great YouTube series called You Suck at Photoshop. It's still online. I definitely recommend it if you want to learn Photoshop. It's hilarious and really helpful. So I, learned that way, a lot of it on my own, right? Even though I had a bachelor's degree. And I think a lot of people find themselves in this situation where they've invested a ton of money. They got this piece of paper that says they have a bachelor's in some sort of design field, but it's not enough. So yeah, even if you don't have a degree in design field, it can be helpful because you sort of have to start from scratch sometimes. So that was sort of my experience getting into the tech startup field as a designer. But what happened after a while was I started to realize that most of the conversations about what I would do at my daily job was here. It was the client and the salespeople. And they would go back and forth. They would be talking about like, what are we going to sell? Or what do you want to buy? Like this sort of conversation, right? So then that would happen. And then some money would be exchanged. And then the almighty brief would show up. So that brief would be containing all the information that I needed to do my work. So then my boss would get the brief, it would land on his desk, and then of course it would go to me. And I would be in my design cave. And I would just be sitting there freaking out, going like, okay, I don't really know the context here, but I need to execute on this brief. So then it would go back and forth between me and my boss, and I get the first version, right? And the client would always hate the first version, no matter what. So then I would go back and forth, and then around the 17th iteration, we've got something that's approved. And then we'd show it to someone who'd actually use it. And sometimes they'd like it, sometimes they would hate it, but usually it's just kind of ambivalent. Like, we didn't really ever design this thing for them. So I was just thinking, the whole time in my design cave, I'm thinking I want to make something the client will like because, they just paid us all this money, and I really want to impress them. I want to make something the client will like. And that's the thing is, I wasn't really thinking about the users. So this was the first step for me when I started getting into UX design. Was I realized that it wasn't just the person that was paying for the product, the experience, because it was a B2B company and the agency style, right? So business to business, like they're talking back and forth. But there's also the client who's using the product. If you're building a website, you might be paid to build a nice website, but who is actually going to the website? And that opened up my mind to like a whole new set of people, the ones who stumble across the things that I was designing when they're built and actually use them. So for me, that was the first step getting into UX design. So yeah, that was my path. Again, the thing I was using to learn Photoshop on YouTube was You Suck at Photoshop. And that was the YouTube web series that I was using. So that kind of was my path to get into UX design. For a lot of people, it's different. UX design was not really as much of a thing back then. So in 2011 is when I first started working in the tech world. So yeah, what I want to give you now is some understanding of what a UX designer actually does, like today, and the kind of things that I'm working on a daily basis, the way I'm thinking, the methods, the process. So yeah, this is the next section. If you have any questions about my journey or anything that you think it brought up a question for your journey, you can ask it in the Q&A. So today, the way I'm going to talk about these things from this section onward is we're going to be designing or thinking about it as if we're designing a digital product. Now, you can use UX design to design a service, like, think something like the way you might be checked into an emergency room if you arrive there. You can also design like physical things, like you can design a kneecap, for instance, like IDEO is a company that has done work to design medical prosthetics. You could do a combination of both, like think a lemonade stand. Like there's the service that you're selling, the lemonade, and then there's the stand that it exists on, right? There's lots of different things you can design with UX design. But today we're going to think about it like if you're designing maybe an app like a ride-sharing service. That just helps things focus. I want you to know that you can use UX design to design all kinds of things, pretty limitless, because it's basically the scientific method with creatives. So like there's a lot you can do with it. But today we're going to think about and use examples and talk about things from a digital product perspective. And that's kind of how CareerFoundry approaches things because it is the most common use for UX design today. So yeah, that disclaimer out of the way. Here's what I want to start with. Not because I want to start with design processes, because most people go there immediately. And this slide is just to show you that there's a lot of different design processes. This is 4 out of hundreds. These are 4 of the most popular ones, actually, but what these are kind of like step-by-step recipes, right? You start on the left side and you work through them, and as you go to the right, you kind of end up with a finished product. So you could start with the idea of the app at the beginning, and at the end on the right, you have the app itself. So you go through it left to right like that. They look linear. They kind of start on the left and go to the right. There's a lot of these things, right? So yeah, I think this is a good way to understand UX design from the very first time. But the thing is, these are all complicated. I want to keep it very simple with you today, right? If you looked at that slide and felt a little stressed out, that's okay, because those design recipes or design processes, those can be pretty complicated. So we're going to keep it simple today. So this is a process that Maximilian Schmidt, a friend of mine who worked at Intiv, created as a part of his master's thesis. He combined all the different UX type design processes into something extremely simple that you can understand. And I love it because it simplifies what we do in a way that a beginner can understand. So it's broken up into 3 phases: discover, create, and implement. So these are kind of like the ways you're thinking. You know, if you got the discover phase, I'm like looking for the new information. What's going on there? Like, what's the lay of the land? Like, what's really happening? That's the discover phase. You got the create phase, where I'm like trying to come up with lots of different things, maybe what you typically think a designer does. And then you've got the implement phase, which is where you're trying to, like, you know, take action, make it real, get things out there. So there's the kind of 3 phases that go through in the UX process. And then, of course, there's little checkpoints here where you have to define things and you have to validate things. So from a bird's eye perspective, zooming way out, way out, simplifying as much as you possibly can, this to me feels like what UX design is. It's still kind of a design process where you go left to right, sure. But I think this is good because it talks about the way you're thinking. So that's the process we're going to use today. I'm going to go through this step by step, talking about the kind of things a UX designer might do. I'm only talking about the good things. I see there's a question about things I like least. That's a great question for later. I can come back to that. Yeah, this is assuming that the way I'm going to talk about these things, it's all digital, but ideally you do this in person, by hand even. So that's also a possibility. But let's get into it. So the first phase is discover. What's really going on? Building empathy with your user, making sure you solve the right problem, which is super important in UX design. So that's this thing. This is discover, right? As you can see, you're kind of like, there's these little stars are spaced out, and then they get a little bit closer and closer until you start to see patterns. That's what discover is all about. As a UX designer, I'm trying to look deep inside to what the customer is thinking. You know, I want to know what's going on with them, right? And I think you all want to listen to the customer. That's kind of the basis of UX design. But what you can do is you can see a lot of information going on when you're actually like talking to your customer. You can see what they're saying, you know, what their mouth is moving, their facial expressions. If you go a bit deeper, you can try and figure out what they're thinking. And if you go even deeper, the real true thing you should be looking for is what they're feeling. Now, of course, it's easy to listen to what they say, and it's harder to know what they're thinking, and it's really hard to know what they're feeling. But this is what we try and do as UX designers. We're trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with humans. You know, it's a human-centered practice. So this is what you should sort of aspire to. So on a daily basis, I am looking at ways to understand what users are feeling, and that's a difficult thing to do. But one of the best ways to do this is interviewing. So yeah, you could say things like, okay, I made this design. Do you like this? And then they'll say something like, yes or no. And that doesn't get you very far. So this is kind of an example of what not to do when you're interviewing. Even better, I would say something like, can you tell me about your first experience using a ride-sharing service? Now, I don't know about you, but that immediately makes me think, okay, it's story time, right? Using digital products is more like a movie that you experience than it is like a snapshot. So when you walk through things and tell stories just like you would if you were trying to like write something for a movie, it helps you understand the real process. So digital apps are and products, the thing we're focusing on today, they're very complex, right? There's lots of options. Where we use them changes everything. If we have certain things, maybe perhaps we're like visually disabled, we won't be able to use it the same way as someone who can use it. Maybe we're temporarily disabled by like not having a lot of light, or maybe we're driving. Like there's a whole lot of things can affect and make things super complicated when it comes to digital products. So what we try and do is understand how they're feeling about a product. So if I ask you about your first experience with the ride sharing service, you can tell me a story. And when you tell me that story, I'll be looking for a lot of specific things to know how to design that experience better. Some of the things we try and do is use open-ended questions. Here's some examples of open-ended questions. How did you hear about our service? There's no way I could say yes or no to that. I have to give you a more complex answer. What did you expect to happen? Well, you have to tell me what you were expecting before something that already happened, which is a super interesting way to get at what were they already expecting, like what were the things they were coming to the table with. Another great thing I like to ask is, how would you use this tool? How would you use it in real life? Like, you can tell me what you think about it. You can tell me, a lot of different things, but I want to know how you'll actually be using this thing. And a pro tip here, you can always follow up with why. You can always dig deeper. We have a thing called the 5 whys we use in UX design. And if you just ask why 5 times, you can probably get to the root of any problem. So these are the kind of things we do as a UX designer. I mean, this is, if you're noticing some similarities, this might sound a bit like a journalist. It might sound a bit like a psychoanalyst. There's a lot of things that, a lot of different disciplines we borrow from as UX designers. And I think interviewing is a super important one. While you're interviewing, it's important to do note-taking. So note-taking is a huge part of what I do when I'm doing interviewing. I think note-taking is a really advanced art to do it quickly, to do it well. I personally like to just use notes on the Mac because it's always available. It doesn't need internet. It's super fast. I like to do nested bullet points when I'm taking my notes, but you can just use a piece of paper and a pen. Lots of people do sketch notes where they kind of like visually take notes as people are talking. That's like a pro move for sure. We like to share our notes in Google Docs so we can get lots of different feedback from different people. People can leave comments. A lot of people like Evernote because they can access it everywhere on their phone, on their work computer, and blah, blah, blah. So you're just taking notes as people are interviewing. Sometimes we'll do lots of interviews remote, especially lately. So I like to use a tool called Whereby. There's nothing to download. It's quick and easy to use. So you can just send someone a link. They get that link. They can jump on a call. You can, of course, use Zoom, Google Meet. These are pretty common tools. And then I really like, if you have an Android phone, especially if you have a Pixel, there's a recorder app that you can hit record, and then it automatically transcribes what you're saying, so you don't have to type it up later. This is super cool. But overall, I would say get good at taking notes, and that's better than recording. If you're really good at taking notes, you will make sure you take good ones, and the pressure of it not being recorded actually makes you listen a little bit better. I can tell you I recorded tons and tons of interviews, and I rarely go back and listen to them. So learning to take notes is a super valuable skill in doing interviews and as a UX designer. Also, another thing we do called sense making. Sounds like magic and sounds like some crazy skill, but really it's just convergent thinking. What you're trying to do is make sense of a lot of information. So one thing we like to do is take those notes from the interviews. We'll put a single thought onto a Post-it, and we'll try and gather our notes in sort of a way that we can make sense of them, right? Because Post-its are great. They can only fit one thought, and you can move them around. So that gives them lots of options and flexibility. So you always see, UX designers using Post-its. That's because they contain one thought, and they're flexible. You can move them around. If you try and move things around in a notes folder, it's not as easy. You have to like copy it, paste it. With a Post-it, you can just grab it, you can move it. You can say, oh, these two things are similar. Let's move them together. So that's why we use Post-its. Part of this is maybe we want to put things into a framework. We can divide up our notes based on things that they said, things that we think maybe they're thinking, and then things we think maybe they're feeling. So that way we've already got a quick little framework to divide up the notes. I like to teach this one first because it's very simple. It's similar to what I was talking about before, trying to get to the feeling. It can show you that feeling is difficult, and it can kind of be a nice way to put feeling up there on the pedestal, and we can try and get there, right? And then you could take the whole interview and you can divide it up into these 3 categories. And by doing that, you'll come to some interesting conclusions, and you'll start to make sense out of the interview itself. There's lots of ways to categorize notes, lots of different sense-making methods. This is just one, I'm just going through quickly here today. But yeah, you could also divide your notes based on things that were positive, they said, things that were negative. It's pretty simple, right? You want to know the negative things so you can fix them. You want to know the positive things. So yeah, pain points and goals, as I said, saying, thinking, and feeling, and there's a ton more. So yeah, maybe that gives you a little insight into it's not just asking the user, what do you want us to design, and giving it to them. It can be a pretty complex process, but these are the kind of things that I'm doing on a daily basis. Another really cool thing that we do all the time is affinity diagramming, or also called affinity mapping. So what we do is we get all our notes on the wall, and then we start to say, okay, where are there commonalities? Like if they're talking about things they do in the car, we say, okay, those are about commute things. So we put those 2 together and we circle that and we say commute. So we put them in a bucket and we name that bucket. And you can do that and organize and organize and organize until you have buckets within buckets, but that's the essential idea, right? So this is a really fun thing to do. I recommend getting everyone in the room to do this. It's better the more people are involved. It's better as you show them what you're doing. You know, you can have one person putting them on the board, but everyone should be watching. It's a really fun group activity that we do all the time. So this is one of my favorite methods. It's called affinity diagramming. Okay, so those were some of the discover things, but what about define? So we need to define this problem before we can move on. We discovered a lot of stuff, right? So, you know, maybe we're at week 2 of the project, or maybe it's just Tuesday and we did discover on Monday, you know, it can change. But what we want to do is define. So what do we focus on? How do we define a problem? So one of the things we do is called reframing. This is something maybe you've heard of, you know, like therapists do this quite a bit. You know, it's like taking something that you've heard, reframing it into a different way, getting everyone to agree on it. So one of the ways that we reframe problems is we reframe them into how might we statements. And how might we statements are like a challenge, right? This is the format, the action by the service or product for the user. It's kind of like, that's like a Mad Lib. You can fill the information in. But usually we put them on a Post-it. We put HMW in the top left corner, and we say what the how might we is. And ideally, we're as specific as possible. That's probably confusing to you, so I'm going to give you an example. So here's an example. How might we help people become more mobile by offering a ride-sharing service for people that don't want to own a car? So some very specific things there. So we said become more mobile. We didn't say get them from point A to point B. So, you know, we're focused on the mobility here. That's the sort of mindset we want to give. We said a ride-sharing service. We didn't say Uber. We didn't say Lyft. We didn't say specifically. We didn't say whether it was, you know, a motorcycle or a car, because we want it to be a ride-sharing service in general, right? So being very careful about language here. And then we're saying for people that don't want to own a car. We're not saying for people who don't own a car. We're saying people who don't want to own a car. So maybe they live in a big city, and that's why they don't want to own a car. So if you can get your team, you know, and this kind of how might we would probably come after a lot of debate with the team, and a UX designer could lead that, but you definitely want to get people on board. This define stage is all about making sure that you have everything defined, paying very careful to the language so that everything is kind of set up, and then you can move on. So yeah, reframing is a super cool tool. How might we statements are used by every designer almost who's in the product world, a lot of product people, but this is a really great tool for the UX designer. Jumping forward to the create stage, what we're going to do here is sketch and scribble. We want to think visually, right? So this is here, this little loop-de-loop situation. And I love this diagram from the Fountain Institute, because it's like you're going around several times, right? You know, and the circles are getting smaller, more specific, just kind of the feeling that you have. So I said visual thinking. What does visual thinking mean? Well, I mean, I could have said we sketch a lot. But if I say sketch, you might have certain ideas from the art world, or you might picture something like this image here where she is sketching onto some mobile templates here. So when I say visual thinking, I mean you let your hand and the pen do the thinking for you. And that means things aren't perfect. That doesn't mean like out pops a perfect app that you're going to use. The thing that might pop out might be two stick figures having a conversation about their problem. That's a great way to start. I think it's great to start with stick figures. I think storyboarding is a really helpful way to start as well. I mean, of course, you start sketching, be messy, and then work into a storyboard. And then you can maybe move into the app that is the storyboard kind of gives you the context for. So, I mean, just these are all ways of visual thinking. I think good UX designers always have a notepad next to them. Got mine here, got your notepad, always have a way to take notes, be visual, have fun. It helps you remember things, but also just kind of let your hand and your brain, connect and do some thinking in a visual way. So yeah, this is something that we do on a daily basis. If we're not doing it, it can definitely slow you down. I think it takes a bit of time to do some visual thinking, but it definitely saves you time in the long run because you let your kind of brain go through some of the possibilities. We also do a lot of whiteboarding, so it's not just our own sketches and our own notepads. We do whiteboarding with our team to kind of facilitate the conversation. Whiteboarding is a super helpful tool you can use to get everyone on the same page. And you don't have to be good, you have to be artistic. Like I still can barely draw a square properly, but I'm always doing it quickly. You get the idea, you approximate things, you're just scribbling and doodling, right? You're not making beautiful sketches. So that's visual thinking for the UX designer and something you should be doing every day. Wireframing, I'm sure you've heard of this one. This is always one of the things that people latch onto when they first hear about UX design, but it's very simple. It's just like an architect's blueprints, it's focusing on functionality and not focusing on aesthetics, right? So it's like a plan for what the experience will be. And pro tip here, stay sketchy. Don't use color. Like if you use a lot of color and you use nice fonts and nice icons, like this probably has too many icons, then this example, then actually what's going to happen is your people in your team, the stakeholders, the people you're testing this with, they're going to fall in love with those icons, and then you won't be able to change them because they're going to be like, oh, what happened to those icons in the wireframing stage? So try and just keep things sketchy. You can see this example, there's a box with an X through it, which means placeholder. Like that's an image, but you just put a box with a cross through it, right? You can even put like scribbly lines for the text. You don't even have to write the text in. And you can do this on pen and paper. I think it's probably good to start there with the visual thinking approach and then work your way into wireframing. And if you're doing digital products, you're definitely going to wireframe at some point. It's a really important stage. Don't skip it. Do it. Keep it as sketchy as long as possible. Don't try and make things look pretty. Get everyone to focus on the usability because UX design is all about the usability of things. So that's a wireframe. A lot of tools can do it. Sketch, XD, Figma are the big design programs UX designers and UI designers use. But Balsamiq is custom made and it only does wireframes, which makes it really super cool to use because the program itself is limiting. So there's no, I think you can add color, but it's difficult. So it's like, it keeps you kind of within your lane of making wireframes, and there's no temptation to do something really pretty like you have if you're using Sketch or XD or Figma. So tools like Balsamiq can be super helpful because they keep things sketchy on purpose. So yeah, still in the create phase, but wireframing is a super cool thing UX designers do. Some UI designers also do wireframing, so it's not just a UX design thing, but yeah. All right, then we move into like validate, and I'm going through this as you would go through a project. Here's the checkpoint you need before you get into implementing anything. Yeah, you want to validate that you made the right solution to the problem. And one of the big ways we do this is through prototyping. You might have also heard of prototyping a little bit if you've done some research into UX design, but a prototype is something that approximates the feel of the product you're trying to, or service you're trying to design. So as we said, we're working on an app. In this example, a prototype is kind of like, it makes it feel like the app is real. And there's some really cool tools out there like Envision, UXPen, or Prot that allow you to really make it seem like it's a real app. you can send these prototypes to someone's phone, and they can kind of tap it, interact with it, scroll, do all kinds of things. And it basically, what it does is takes a bunch of different screens and it links them together using little hot buttons, right? Prot is super cool. We teach this in our Intro to UX Design course, and we teach Envision in the main course. There's a million tools to do this, so don't get too attached to any one. But Prot's cool because you can basically sketch out a mobile experience screen by screen by screen on paper. You can take the Prot app on your smartphone, take photos of each screen, add little hot buttons and add areas where the click dummy will be, and then you can make an entire app experience all from a pen and paper and a smartphone. So I think this is really cool. A lot of technology is advancing so that used to we would have to use code to make prototypes, which is why a lot of people used to say designers should code. Now you don't need to because you have things like Envision, UX Pin, and Prot. Maybe there's other design fields where you need to learn how to code. UX design is not one where you need to learn how to code. Maybe if you get into more UI design, you might need to know a bit more about coding, but these tools are getting so advanced that you're able to do everything right there with the tool. Yeah, it's also called a click dummy. These can be very simple, like, this example here is just 3 screens. Click the button, that takes you here. That's a pretty simple one. This is a very complex one. Like, this is a screenshot of an actual really complicated prototype in Figma. So Figma and XD are super interesting because you can design stuff in there and you can also prototype them. So what you're seeing here is a bunch of different screens linked together in a bunch of different ways. That's the blue lines here. So you can see that like one screen has like 4 or 5 different areas where if you click, it will link to another area. So this is like a bird's eye view of how an app works. Obviously, you don't build it like this because the technology isn't advanced enough to actually make it real and upload it to the App Store like this. But you can make it feel pretty close to real. And in this way, you can get to the next stage, which is usability testing. I know there will probably be lots of questions about these 3 things because they are quite in depth. But yeah, so this is the way. This is what you do with those prototypes, right? So you test with at least 5 users, and you will actually identify 75 to 99% of usability issues. What does that mean? I can take a prototype if it's done well and it approximates the real deal, and I can take it into a room and I can test it with 5 different people, and they're going to point out most of the problems. They're going to bring up things I didn't think about. They're going to, hopefully, if they're similar to my main customer, these tester group, they'll be thinking like my customer, and they'll give me really good data about what's going on. So you can see here, there's 5 users, and then there's 2 people saying, so what would you do next? And the tester says, I think I'd click here. This is a very common interaction we have when we're doing usability testing. Like before they actually click something, we say, what would you do next? And they tell us, and they do it, right? So we watch what they say, what they do, and we can learn about what we designed and if it's the right thing, and we can adjust. So usability testing is a super important thing in UX design. There's lots of different ways to do testing, but this is like seeing, is it desirable? And often we give the tester a goal. We say like, okay, what we want you to do is, here's a task. Here's the task, go for it. And we watch them, and we see if they can complete the task. We see how they complete the task, and then we can gauge whether we did the right thing when we design stuff. Yeah, this thing, usability testing, one of the things we talked about earlier, the interviewing, these are very firmly in the UX research category. So in some companies, maybe they'll have a dedicated UX researcher, and they're handling all the interviews. They're doing some sense making with the notes, and they're also running the usability tests. So that's quite common in big companies to have a single UX researcher who's handling all of those things. But for most places, the UX designers do a lot of these things, and even sometimes the UI designers are involved as well. I'll get into that UX research thing later, so definitely put some questions in about that. And then also a super important thing with UX designers is once you know the right approach, because you interviewed, you came up with some solutions, you defined everything properly, you even tested it with some users, you're going to know that you have the right approach. You're going to know that for the problem you all agreed on, you have the right solution, or at least it's really close, right? So presenting is a way to convince your team that that's the case. Like you can learn all these things, but if you just keep it to yourself and never do anything with it, it's no good. You have to present it to your team. So of course, like anything, presenting well is an art, of course, in itself. But I agree. I think you should always try and show, not tell. Let them look at the prototype. Let them watch the video, the usability test. Summarize what happened in bullet points. Don't use big blocks of text. I think often when you start off, you may not be super experienced in presenting, and that's okay. But eventually, you want to get better at it, because I think you'll find that the things that you learn will be more impactful if you know how to present. So then the last phase of this process is implement. This is where you make it real, and I guess where you make it pretty, question mark. But the thing is, this implement phase is actually more user interface design, right? So user experience design kind of ends somewhere around the validate phase. And of course, this can change different companies, but usually it's something along the discover all the way to validate. The implement phase would be UI design, not UX design. Now, a lot of places, the same person is doing UX design, UI design. I understand that. For your starting out purposes, it's better to think of them. A lot of people think of them separately. Eventually, you probably will try and get good at UX design and UI design. Or maybe you go to a big company, you specialize. But UX design typically ends after you've figured out the right way to tackle that problem, the right solution to the problem that you defined earlier. And then you have to implement it, which means you have to design it according to the brand style guide. You have to make sure that it works for all the different screen sizes. Are you designing something for an Apple Watch and an iPhone, as well as a desktop? You got to think about all those different screen sizes. You got to think about how the experience feels. Like, what's the look and feel? Is it, with a light style, or is it a dark style? What sort of things are we trying to communicate with the brand? Are we using, what typography are we using? There's a lot of different things that go into the details of implementing. And of course, there's the devs who will build this thing and make it real. So yeah, hopefully that has given you a little bit of an idea of the process you might go through. The thing to keep in mind is it's not just a left to right, one line kind of thing. It's an ongoing process. It's a loop. You might do the first phase. You might do some discovery, and then realize after you're almost done, you need to go back and do more discovery because you understand, a new user is involved or something like that, a new user group. There's lots of things you might double back on and repeat. So this phase design process I showed you, you could go left to right, but you also might circle back. You might skip around, and that's okay. It's easier to understand it if you think about it from left to right, like a recipe to cook something. But in reality, it's a circular process. And you will start at the end and start right back over again on the same feature oftentimes. So you'll go through the whole process, you'll launch it, and then you'll start right again working on it and making it better. I wouldn't get too caught up in specific design processes. You'll find your own processes and methods as you get into it. This is actually a design thinking process. I know you might have heard a lot about design thinking. I think design thinking is like the gateway drug to get into UX design. Design thinking is two things. Originally, it was selling design to non-designers, so teaching businessmen design. So they call it design thinking. Another thing is that it really helped people understand that you don't just have to paint, create, write. When you're a designer, you can also think. So the way a designer thinks is important, especially in UX design. So it brought to rise the popularity of design as a thing that is just a thinking task. Whereas before, people thought it was more about craft. It was the more UI design approach where you're making things look really pretty, but actually it's the thinking that goes into stuff that's also important. But I wouldn't get too caught up in this. UX design processes, design thinking processes are almost identical because design thinking is kind of a summary of a lot of things that happen in UX design. So yeah, it's an ongoing process. This is a good way to start learning, so keep this in mind. But obviously, this is, for a lot of you, your first understanding of the UX design process. So it's just a good way to start. Yeah, if you want to start getting into learning a bit more, I think a lot of people start to try and get the difference between UI and UX. As I said, you might do both one day, but it's good to start off to understand the difference. And hopefully you understand a little bit better based on today. But people like to use this iceberg kind of graphic to help you understand that To the ship, they see this UI thing coming out of the water, and they have no idea how much UX has gone into it, because you don't see the UX. UI is what you see. UX is how you get there. So you build up to get to the UI through the UX. So there's things like the how might we statements, problem statements, user research, the information architecture. How is the whole app organized? How are you supposed to go through the app? Those are user flows. You don't see those things as a user. You just see a pretty app that has a nice look and feel. You see maybe some animations, some nice interactions. It makes you feel some emotions. You don't see all the stuff that goes into everything below. So that's kind of how you can think about UX and UI. And yeah, hopefully that helps you see a lot of the tasks that you do on a daily basis. So these are the things we went through. This UX process I walked you through is subjective. It's my own personal thinking for how my daily life can go as a UX designer. But here's some things you do. You do some interviewing, do some note taking, some sense making, some reframing, some visual thinking or sketching, some prototyping, usability testing, presenting, and even some implementing. So yeah, hopefully that brings the world of what a UX designer actually does into something you can actually focus on. And don't worry, we're going to send you this presentation. You can look at it later and go through these things to kind of remind yourself of what you learned. But that's a summary. So now it's question time. So I've got a lot of questions that have been pouring in. Take some time if you want. If what I told you about my own personal experience sparks some questions, feel free to go ahead and go through them. But I'm going to look at some of the questions that Jakob has selected for me to look at. So we're going to start here at the top. Okay, so this one happened early on. Someone asked, what software and tools do you use as a UX designer? So this includes tools to hand off to developers. Yeah, so I didn't get into that. That's part of the implement phase. I'm going to switch back to show this. So yeah, the implement phase, right? That feels firmly in the world of UI design, but a UX/UI designer or a product designer might do those things. Used to, we would use Sketch at CareerFoundry, and we would get the whole thing designed in Sketch. We'd start off with Balsamic, do the wireframes, then we do it in Sketch, the high fidelity mockups, and then we put those high fidelity mockups in Zeppelin, and we would send that to the developers, have some conversations. They would look at that, use it to build it. You can also now use just Figma for all that. So Adobe XD and Figma do everything from initial wireframes all the way to handing off things to a developer, so turning designs into code. At the moment, a lot of things you design are kind of like static images. So I'm like designing a snapshot, and the developer is taking that flat snapshot and then ideally looking at the layers involved and trying to make it into something that's clickable, real in code, and has depth. That's starting to change. A lot of design programs are making it easier to add depth to the thing by letting you prototype right there in the software, and then also letting you hand off designs to developer right there in the software. And Figma and XD are really good at this. I think Figma's probably the best in my opinion. So you can kind of condense it down to one tool, where it used to take like 4 or 5 tools. Now you can do the whole thing in Figma, which is really nice. Sketch is probably coming out with this soon, and XD has come out with this since Figma did it. So that can be super interesting. Another question here. How valuable is my career journey? Does it add to my market value combined with the UX/UI qualification? This is something that I've picked up on a lot of different quarters. We've spent 3 months just doing research. So we did some research on people's career path, trying to figure out like what makes them purchase the course. We also did a lot of research on what gets them a job after the course. So through that, I can tell you that something we've noticed is people always want to leverage their past experience and combine it with what they're learning at CareerFoundry, say combine it with UX, and then make something that's like a new career, right? And I think this is pretty smart because you could only do UX design your whole life, and you're competing with a million different people. But if you do UX design and maybe you do copywriting, there's fewer people who can do both, so you stand out a bit more. So there's a bonus there to taking your past experience and combining it with UX. As you can see, UX is really varied. I love UX because I told you about my story getting into graphic design at university, but before I got into graphic design, I tried like every single major possible. I was like, I want to be a journalist. I want to be a philosopher. I want to be a physicist. Like all these crazy varied jobs. I was like sort of into all of them, right? Because I was an all-rounder. UX design is good for that because you never get bored. There's all kinds of different parts of UX design you could kind of specialize in. As I said, it takes from a lot of different fields. Like it takes borrows a lot from journalism, anthropology, sociology, geometry, even a bit, like psychology, definitely. So there's a lot of different things in it. So I think your past experience, it's going to be quite easy to turn it into something that works for UX design. It might be harder for UI design, or web dev or data analysts to kind of take your past experience and make it give you a bit of a head start when you're starting something like UX design. But that's one of the things I like about UX design. Quite accessible, quite broad, so it's hard to really master it, but quite easy to get into and can be combined with a lot of different careers. So yeah, we see that quite a bit. Of course, we have a lot of like graphic designers that get into UX design, like me, but also maybe there's a lot of people who did anthropology, sociology, kind of any sort of research field, and then they get into UX design that way. Those are two very common paths. We also see a lot of people get into UX design through marketing. Conversion rate optimization is very similar to a lot of the things you'll do in UX design. A lot of crossovers. Also, of course, project management, product management. It's quite easy to get into UX from that because it's very similar. We share a lot of the same tasks as well. So yeah, hope that answers your question. I've been talking a mile a minute. So, okay, jump back in to the next question. Do you think post-COVID, the increase of remote and digital work will increase the demand for UX professionals? This is a super interesting question because before the lockdown, I got asked all the time, well, what's better for remote work, UX design or UI design? And I would basically tell them that UI design is probably easier to do remote work because you have fewer meetings, which can be the case depending on the team. But now I think, and also like UX design, there's a lot of like in-person things that happen. I think that was my personal experience of running meetings in person and liking that. Now, and there was tools like Miro, M-I-R-O, and there's tools like Mural, M-U-R-A-L, very similar name, they do very similar things. I've been using those quite a bit since the lockdown, and I found that it's just as easy as doing meetings in real life. And basically, these tools approximate the feeling of having a giant wall, and they let you put Post-its on that wall in a sort of digital space. But it's not just that. Like you can put all kinds of things. You can drop a video in. You can set up, like you can drop a graphic in there. You can say like, okay, I want to structure this project like this, and I put that on the wall, and we work from left to right. Maybe I could put this design process here from the Fountain Institute. Maybe I could put that there. I could put that on the wall, and then I could work through that. It's just got a lot of flexibility. And also I like that you save paper. And also I like that I can take notes in my note-taking tool, and I can copy paste those into a board like Mural or Miro, and I can just copy paste those notes, and I don't have to like write them with a pen and do it twice. So yeah, I think things are getting easier actually with remote. So I think, yeah, you'll see a lot more offerings for UX design to be done remote. I think there was already quite a few roles for design to be done remote. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you have some meetings to try and determine what the problem is, but once you get the problem defined, that create stage, a lot of that can be done on your own. It's good to do it with other people. It's good to facilitate workshops with your coworkers where you do that, but most of the time you're going to be doing that create stage on your own. So yeah, that's quite easy to do from remote. Yeah, hope that answers your question. Next question is, what do you personally like least about a UX designer's job/workday? I can tell you the thing I like doing the least is going back and listening to interviews that have already happened and transcribing them into notes. And I say that with obviously a bit of a caveat that I don't have to do that anymore because I have a Google Pixel phone, and if I want to, I can record the interview, or during the interview, hit record on my phone. Of course, I always ask permission because it's illegal to record without asking the person's permission. But if they give me permission, then I can just record it using my phone, and then it automatically transcribes. So now I don't ever have to do that. But actually, I didn't do that very often. I recorded tons of interviews. As I said, I rarely went back and watched them. In 2020, most people have more data than they know what to do with. And that's the reality, because there's so many ways to capture data. What people don't have is good notes, because I could have the best interview ever. I could record it, but it's not going to feel the same when I go back and listen to it. So I used to always hate going back and listening to interviews because I would get bored. I wouldn't want to hear the same thing over. That's like a task you might get an intern to do. It's just kind of repetitive. It's a bit boring, monotonous. But what I like doing now is I do the interview. I don't record it. I take notes, and if I miss something, I miss it, and that's okay. So yeah, I've kind of gotten around that, which is my least favorite thing. Another thing I don't always like doing is sketching. I have a tendency not to want to sketch. So I said earlier, good UX designers think visually and sketch a lot. And I was thinking about myself as not always being a good UX designer, because I try and have a nice notebook with me at all times, but I sometimes forget to start by thinking visually. So yeah, it's not that I don't like it. I drew a lot as a kid growing up, but sometimes there's a block for me to use tools in the real life. Like I tend to be kind of stuck to digital tools sometimes. I'm not really sure why, but yeah, for me, I sometimes have a block on using pen and paper. But I think UX design can be done on pen and paper the entire process. I can start with a sketch. I can do a really pretty, sketch with a nice pen and taking my time, and it looks just the same as a wireframe done in Sketch or Balsamiq. I can hand that to a developer and talk him through how to build that, and then we could just use that. So it's possible just to use pen and paper. Okay, got a lot of questions here. Yeah, question about budgets. So Kathy says she comes from a design background in interior architecture. Hardest part of the job I had was the customer would show me 100 different styles with a small budget. Is this similar in UX? It's not really. UX is really at the heart of it saving a lot of money, because you're not wasting time building the wrong thing. Developers should love you because you've already tested a couple different approaches before they have to build something. Yeah, so in that way you save money because you've already tested a couple different ideas, crossed off the bad ones, and you're just building the right ones. So I'd say it saves money. You don't really get into a lot of look and style, that kind of thing. That's more in the UI design world. Usually, if you're working for a company, you already have your style guide. You just apply it to your wireframe. Ideally, that's in a perfect world. There's always a lot of back and forth. Everyone has an opinion on design, and that can be kind of annoying because you're constantly having to accommodate a lot of internal stakeholders. But generally speaking, yeah, the UX designer, that's not really their role. They're focusing on functionality, usability, not aesthetics. And the different looks, that falls in the aesthetic realm. And I also like doing aesthetics sometimes. I like to do UI design. I still do it from time to time. It's a nice change. It uses different parts of your brain. So yeah, it's something you can still do. As I said, a lot of people do UX and UI. So. Question from Maria: how do you go about finding users to interview? Super good question. Are requirements set, and how do you screen users for the research? You know a little bit about this, I think. I've been trying to be a user tester through usertesting.com, but some don't seem to qualify for anything. Trying out, so yeah, you can make, I think, okay money with these sites as a tester. What we do is we have a really great student Slack group. They're super engaged. They love to try out as testers because they're learning, how to do the things. So if a student volunteers to test something, they're learning how I'm doing the test, and how I'm leading it, and that can help them in their career. So we have people who are quite eager to do testing. We do usually pay them, unless we're doing maybe an interview where we're offering advice in exchange, something like that. But what we do is we will oftentimes, it's kind of a funnel, right? So we'll start with a really large group. We'll start with some attributes we're looking for. So I'll do a Google Doc, talk with everyone involved, say like, who's the target user here? Like, what are we looking for? And if we can, we just narrow down and we find those people using the tools in our platform or using Slack or something. If we don't have anything focused like that, we do this funnel. We start really big, send out a link to take a survey. That's the top of the funnel. The people who click the survey are fewer. The ones who say the right things in the survey are even fewer. And then the ones who are the right ones, we send a link to book a meeting. So once they get that link, they just choose from a bunch of meeting slots. That's the bottom part of the funnel. And then the people that choose that hopefully are the right ones, and they're the ones who we do user testing with. So yeah, we do qualify them with a screener survey. I really like Typeform. Typeform is a really beautiful survey creating tool that we use at CareerFoundry. Yeah, it's super helpful. It gives you a lot of really nice reports when you're done, but it doesn't have to be complicated. You can use Google Forms pretty quickly. So that's how we find users. Pro move is to target them using like LinkedIn, Facebook ads, because it gives you some tools built in. Like I can choose people who are like 35 to 40 living in Portland, and even choose like their job titles for LinkedIn. So you can use that to pick users. It's not something I've done quite a bit just because I haven't learned how to do that. But sometimes I'll get people on our team who are managing social media or doing ads or conversions. They've helped me out in the past to pick people. So yeah. There's a really great book, Rocket Surgery Made Easy, about this. You should check out. I don't have it with me. It's the Steve Krug book. It's not this book. It's the other book called Rocket Surgery Made Easy. That's all about testing. That's a great book to get into. This is just a good general book about usability, by the way, if you're interested. Probably the quickest book you can read about UX, as you can see. Not very big. You can read it on a long flight if you're still taking notes these days. So yeah. Next question. Is it your job to recruit the potential end users to interview? Yes. I mean, it is my job. It doesn't have to be. I like to do that because I'm a design manager as well, so I try and enable my designers. And usually the hard thing is you don't have enough time to do user testing. So it's really good. It's really helpful. It's something that takes time, though. So you're trying to squeeze a full day of user testing into a 2-week project, and it does take a full day to interview 5 people. It can be difficult. So I always try and do that for my team so that I can encourage them to do it more, because I think it's good. And everyone at the company is on board with that, so that's helpful. We get a lot of buy-in at CareerFoundry to do user testing, and we get a budget. So yeah, like I'll do that, but it could be anybody. Sometimes if you have a UX researcher, they'll take care of that. I like to just set up a couple calendars that are always available. I use it's called usepowwow.com. That's a tool where you can pick slots and you can just send out a link. People book it. You can take care of everything from there. It makes it pretty quick. Meeting Bird is also a good one. Meeting Bird is better if you want to set up a bunch of zones. So if you want to say from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., let's do some interviews. Meeting Bird's good for that. But if you have a 30-minute slot here, 30-minute slot there, use Powwow is good for that. They're both free, so I definitely recommend using those tools. Oh yeah, the question about user research. Can you specialize in user research? Maybe mention different specializations like UX researcher, UX writer, UX/UI designer. Okay. Yeah, the UX specializations is a pretty long conversation, but I can give you a quick intro. Basically, yes, you can specialize in user research. That's called a UX researcher. This is a really growing field. You see it at big tech companies, Google, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. These people handle the upfront. So they may not start with a problem, but they start looking for problems. Whereas a regular UX designer will oftentimes start with a problem that he's given from his team or from his boss or something. So yeah, that's really that discover phase that I was talking about. UX researchers live in discover phase. UX designers all do some discovery, but UX researchers do some really upfront discovery. So they're all the way far over on the left side there, like really trying to dig in and figure out what's going on with our customers. They're doing exploratory research, right? That's UX researcher. So if your background is in any kind of like scientific research, you're going to be good at that. If you're into psychology, you probably get into that. I know a lot of people really like it. You know, there's also the idea you can do field studies. You can sometimes work abroad and do like you can go to people's home and watch them use the app you're working on. For big companies, there's opportunities like this, so it can be cool if you like to travel. UX research can be really nice. I find it super interesting. I've done a lot of it at CareerFoundry, never just it on its own, so I can't really offer a whole lot of insight into being a UX researcher only. But yeah, it's a super interesting field. Another specializations, voice design. Voice design has really got a ton of UX in it, although you might not think that, but you use UX methodologies and tools and processes. You just are designing for the ear rather than the eye. So we offer specializations in voice design. Obviously, you might get into UI design, become a UX UI designer. There's a difference between learning UX and UI. I might want to talk about that. That's super interesting. I do a lot of consultations for students who are interested in the course, and they want to know what should I choose, UX design or UI design. So if that's you, listen up. This could be helpful for you. I think that learning UX is very explicit, and the rules are set. It's more like learning a typical university course. Like you get the mindset, the methods, the process, the methodology, and on paper you know how to do it. Of course, it takes some understanding to feel it, and blah blah blah. But I think it's easy to kind of learn like you would most courses. UI design is a bit more like drawing. So I can tell you how to draw in 10 minutes, but it's not going to help you draw well. You can know how to do it on paper, but no pun intended, but you're not going to actually know how to do it in practice. So that's the difference there. UI design is more like drawing. UX design is more like geometry or philosophy or something like that. UI design, I think it takes looking at a lot of good UI design, building your taste. That's a big part of it. I think UX designers can benefit from that as well. So I recommend starting every day looking at good design before you start work or you start your classes. But UI design, there's a lot of tacit knowledge involved. What do I mean by that? It means you kind of have to figure out by doing it. So we obviously teach a UI design course. What we do is we have you recreate really good UI at first, and then we have you learn the sort of rules of designing for mobile, for instance, and then we have you create UI based around that. We have you adapt it to the web, so doing kind of like a laptop size screen, learning how to make your own icons, like a lot of different things involved, kind of nuts and bolts. But it is going to take practice. Whereas UX designer, it's going to take practice to think like an UX designer, but it's easier to kind of be explained it. So hopefully that helps a little bit, the difference between the two fields. I know that might sound a bit confusing, but yeah, I think if you already come from a design or an art background, UI designer will be easier for you, I think, because you'll understand balance, layout, composition, color theory. These kind of things really help you in UI design. Whereas UX design, I think understanding people, research, those kind of things are more important. So those could give you an edge. As I said, you'll probably end up doing both. So don't get too caught up in the differences there. This is a UX design webinar. I am a bit biased. I like UX design better, but I still like UI design. So that's how I feel about it. There's going to be more specializations in the future, so stay tuned. I see UX design, it's a really broad thing. I see it splitting off into a lot of different specializations. So, like data-driven design, or UX for really large screens. I think there's a lot of potential for specialization there. So yeah. Next question: how many people do you typically work with the creating process? Is it usually a team effort or a single person asking for the input from others? I think UX design is more of a team thing. I think design should be a team sport. You should be training anyone you work with to understand design. Don't keep it precious. Help people learn it. UX design is a very collaborative job. It's a lot like an architect. You're kind of negotiating between the people who are going to build the thing you designed and the people that you're designing the thing for, and the people that you report to as your job. So, and if you're a freelancer, you're still dealing with two out of those three. So there's a lot of collaboration, definitely. I like that. I wouldn't say that I'm an extrovert necessarily, but I do enjoy working with people. You can be an introvert and be a UX designer, no problem. You can communicate via written word and docs and that kind of thing. You don't always have to have meetings. So yeah, I don't think you have to be an extrovert, but there are a lot of interactions, a lot of balancing, a lot of working with a lot of different people. So yeah, that's kind of how it feels to me. Hopefully that answered your question. A question from Lorena. She would like to know more about the sketching process. How do you decide this content here, this bottom there? Yeah, okay. Lorena, I wish you could join our UX workshop that we were doing before we had the quarantine. We tried a couple different methods. I almost put those in this presentation because I adapted this presentation from our UX workshop. There's obviously you're listening to me and I'm talking, so it's a bit different than a workshop. But one of the things we do in the workshop is we take a piece of paper. So yeah, we've got a piece of paper here. So we've got a piece of paper, right? What I would do is fold it in half, right? Fold it in half, and then I would fold it in half again. Okay, so now I have a piece of paper divided up into 4 sections. And what we do is we take 8 minutes, I think. And so 8 minutes total. I set a timer. We spend 2 minutes designing a completely novel solution to a problem in this one corner. Then we spend 2 minutes in this corner, then 2 minutes in this corner, then 2 minutes in this corner. By the end of the 8 minutes, we should have 4 different solutions to a process. And it's a little bit of pressure, time pressure. Creativity can be done under time pressure. I know that sounds kind of crazy if you come from the art world, but it is possible. For me, it really pushes me to think outside the box. This is something we'll do if we're in a workshop setting. If I'm by myself, I don't normally time myself like that. I don't give myself that time pressure, but it's something you can do. So yeah, that's one way to sketch. I prefer to do stick figures and storyboarding first, just because it's so easy to jump to drawing a UI, sketching out an app. I think it's better to think about the context and the experience around the app, so it's fine to jump into sketching out UI if you already have it in your mind, but I think it's good to challenge yourself to think visually by doodling, kind of to start off. Just let yourself doodle whatever you think comes to mind. Like think about the problem, start doodling, start sketching, work your way up into something a little more high fidelity and pretty. Can someone with introvert have success in UX design, especially when it involves interviewing usability testing session? Yeah, I can say from personal experience, there are UX designers on my team that I would say are introverted, although maybe they're completely different outside of work. But yeah, it's possible. I think every job is going to require human-to-human interactions, so and I know introverts can handle that. It can be a long day. Like I'm kind of like 55%, so just over the line extrovert every time I take these sort of things. But I've done a lot of practice in presenting and doing workshops, so I can sit here and blab for an hour and a half at you. But it does drain me, right? Even though I'm more on the extroverted side of things. A full day of interviews, something like hopefully no more than 5 interviews because you need time in between. But if you have 5 interviews, maybe they're going 45 minutes each. That's a long day. At the end of that day, I am completely drained. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to go home and listen to music and have a glass of wine and do nothing. So yeah, it can be a bit draining. More draining if you're an introvert, for sure. But that's like one side of the coin. Like if you're a UX researcher, yeah, that's your high contact, high touch situation. The other side is doing desk research. And that is going to be super fun for an introvert because you're just taking a problem and you're saying, okay, what's on the internet that I can learn to help me discover what's going on? There's like industry reports, there's master's thesis, there's all kinds of things out there that you can use to try and figure out how should I solve this problem. So I think like that's an introvert's dream, right? Maybe if you're an introvert, you try and get it to where, you let your boss know you prefer that work, and then you can do more of that work. Maybe you have a super extroverted junior UX designer and they want to do all the user testing and interviewing. Then you can just take notes. One thing I didn't talk about is when you're doing interviewing, you want to have one person who's like the friend, the interviewer, the host. Imagine like you're watching 60 Seconds. It's that person who's doing the interviewing. There's another person who's taking notes. That's usually how you do it. So there's 3 people in total. Any more than that can be overwhelming for the person being interviewed. So yeah, you can be the person taking notes if you're an introvert. It's certainly an okay thing. So don't think you have to be an extrovert to do UX design. Don't think you have to be an extrovert to do anything for that matter. Have you ever collaborated with a product manager? Because these customer interviews usually is a part of their work. Absolutely. I have a diagram that I've saved and I'm always showing people that says, here's what a UX designer does. Here's what a product manager does. Look at all the crossover. And there's a ton of things in the middle. Whether you do the things that are typically product manager crossover things, or whether you only do things that are only UX design things, depends on the company. If you have really strong product management, and by that I mean product managers, product owners with a lot of experience, and you've got very young UX designers, you're going to end up probably not doing a lot of the product management stuff. They're going to be good at it. They're going to be fast at it. They're going to be better at it than you. So they're going to be doing a lot of those things. Some of the crossover things might be, might be setting up interviews. Maybe defining the problem might be, it should be a collaborative thing, but it might be something that the product managers are doing in like the cards that you're working on. So you might pull a card, it's already defined. Here's the product, here's the requirements, here's what people want, here's the context. That can happen to a UX designer. Some places who don't have product management might let the UX designers do a lot of discovery, really figure out what the problem is, and then they decide, which problem even to tackle. That's kind of the top of the top. When you get to decide which problem to tackle, you've got a really good opportunity as a UX designer. But generally speaking, that problem's already defined mostly for you, and you just kind of reframe it, right? So yeah, there's a lot of crossover between product ownership, product management, and UX design. A lot of crossover between CRO, conversion rate optimization, and some marketing stuff. So those are the areas that you might see some blending of tasks. How do you take your company on the UX journey when it's not something they have ever focused on or had any specialists in before? Interesting. So you're asking me, how do I share what I do with the rest of my company, I think. So imagine I'm the only UX designer. I'm going to put a scenario. I don't know if this is true. This is true of a lot of people, though. UX design is a very new discipline. So imagine you're the only UX designer at the company. You're going to struggle because the way people see UX design and the way UX design is in reality is very different. I'm sure a lot of you were surprised at the things that I said today that I actually do on a daily basis. Imagine people who are not interested in this. They're going to be clueless as to what UX designer does. They're just going to see a designer, or maybe they'll just see an artist. They might just think you're like painting, who knows? You never know what Carol from HR will think about your role. So yeah, you're going to have to deal with some different understandings of what you do. I would say something I ended up doing, I didn't do this on purpose, but when I told you about that job I had in Austin at the startup at Mass Relevance. I started to work on some projects. I was designing things for the sales team to help them sell what we could do. It wasn't what we were actually doing, is what we could potentially do, right? So I would design something, and then the sales team would be like, "This is cool. You should show this to other salespeople." So then I started to do a quick presentation every now and then. I'd be like, "Okay, everyone grab some lunch. I'm going to show you what I designed for Ray. He thought it was cool. He wanted me to show it to you. I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to show you what I did." And I did it on accident because like Ray asked me to do that, for instance. So I got kind of lucky, and I stumbled upon a nice way to help people to help communicate what I did. That showed everyone else that I was doing cool stuff, which probably helped when it came time to get promotions and that kind of thing. It helped me get better at presenting. It helped me to explain what I do, which is super helpful. And that's really what this question's about, I feel like, is how do you explain what you do as a UX designer? Lunch and learn, brown bag. Have a meeting, make it super quick. Do it when people are eating lunch and they're super happy. Talk about what you've been doing. Make a pitch deck to pitch UX design to them. I know they've already hired you, but they probably don't know what you do. So I think this is a really, really nice way to talk about what you do. If you're at a giant company, write a blog post, send it around to some people as a link. What a UX designer actually does is something you learned today. You probably don't have it mastered, but you should do something similar. I think presenting, as I said, is a really important skill. So it could definitely be helpful to try and articulate what it is you do, and you'll get better at it. That's the advice I would leave with you. That goes for any kind of design. I think people still picture us as artists, and we're doing a different thing now. There's such thing as design thinking, which is nothing to do with using your hands, just thinking, right? So it's like things have changed. It's good to remind people, over communicate what you do. Okay, I think I've answered that one. What does it take to be a good UX designer and to actually get into the job market? I saw several UX designers can't get a job. Absolutely, it's hard to get a job. As I laid out for you today, I didn't talk about it a lot, but it's a really satisfying job. I love it. Like this is what I want to do forever. Took me a while to get here, but I really like it. It was hard to get into. I got lucky. I interned for 7 months, and then I was basically a visual designer. And then eventually I got to kind of do UI design after about a year or so. Eventually, I started just asking for UX design projects at work because I was interested. I had a hard time getting access to users, and that's one of the reasons that I moved on, because I wanted to talk to actual users. I was at a B2B company. There wasn't a lot of users I could talk to. CareerFoundry's B2C, and that's why I moved there. It was super interesting to also teach UX design as well. It was interesting to me. So yeah, I mean that to me feels like a very lucky string of incidents. So I can't say like, oh, I did this and I did that. I think it's a hard job to get into sometimes, because when I first started, people only got into UX design through trying out projects at work. You couldn't really find a university that could teach UX design. It just wasn't a thing yet, you know? So now you can actually learn UX design. Like when CareerFoundry first came out, it was a really new thing, because normally you had to like start in web design, graphic design, work your way up, and eventually get into sort of the product type stuff. That's not the case anymore. Like there's so many specializations within design, different roles within design, that you can just pick one, jump in. So yeah, it's easier now, but at the same time, that means a lot of people are doing it. So it's easier to learn it, more people are doing it. Also, more companies are realizing that they need it. So the field is growing, and those are the kind of subtleties happening in the background. I think if you've got a background in visual sides of design, it does help in one sense, because you can sell your work better, but UX design isn't about the visuals and the aesthetics. I just say that to say that if you've practiced a little bit on the visuals, it can be helpful when you're hunting, because you can just make your portfolio piece look prettier. Whereas it could have all the functionality of UX design and get passed over because it doesn't look pretty. This is something that happens to our students at the end. It takes practice as well. It's understandable. Yeah, I think it's a growing field. I think it's a really good job. So you might find some competition. One of the things that some of our career advisors tell us is that, you know, the people that get into tech are oftentimes like the smartest kids in school. Like they're the ones that are like super engaged, raising questions, talking to the teacher afterwards. So that's the kind of people who end up working at Google and Facebook, and that's just the reality. I always kind of like working at smaller companies. You can try a lot of different things. I think the jobs are easier to get through people and connections like that. So I would stress networking. You're doing a good job by going to an event like this. The more you try on the feeling that you're a UX designer, the more you talk to people that that's what you want to do, the more you commit to it, the better you're going to be at describing it, and the more success you're going to have. So obviously we teach you how to become a UX designer, but we don't make you go to networking events. Like you should, we encourage you to, but you should jump in. You should, like from this moment, if you think that this webinar spoke to you and you're interested in UX design, in your mind, call yourself a UX designer. You got a long way to learn, right? But give yourself that confidence that you're going to do that. That's going to be your thing. And that's a super helpful way to get into the field. What I think I see a lot of people who do really well in this field are people who commit to it. You know, they find a way to come up with a story that takes their past experience, takes UX design, and it makes this perfect new thing. And they get good at talking about this story, and they can pitch this story to employers. It's also a lot of work, you know. I think there's a lot of different things to learn here. It's a new field. It can be really frustrating because, you know, CareerFoundry can teach you the right way, in my opinion, but you might have some other UX designer who you're friends with who tells you that's the wrong way because it's a new field, right? So it can be a bit frustrating. I think the best thing to do is just network, try things out, jump in there, meet people, talk to people, find a mentor as soon as you can, get moving, find a design coach, find a design mentor. People are the way we find jobs. If you're a nice person, I want to work with you. So that's always the best way to go about it. But of course, you need to learn how to do UX design, and that's what CareerFoundry is for. We also do a lot of good career services. We have a whole a career person who helps you get your resume in order, get your portfolio looking nice, get your CV in order, a lot of these things. Like they give you this sort of the HR perspective, whereas in the main course, they give you the kind of designer's perspective. So we are thinking about that, and that's something we're super strong at CareerFoundry. Obviously, we have a job guarantee, so if you don't get a job, we don't get paid. So we have to make sure that you get a job. So you follow the process, you'll get one. How stressful is this job? Are people generally appreciative, or is every problem your fault? That's a good point. I guess I have talked a lot about problems. The problems being your fault typically falls on the product manager because they're like the tender of, they're tending the products, right? Obviously, if you design the wrong thing and maybe you didn't do enough discovery, maybe you didn't do enough usability testing, and you design something and it's a big flop, just quickly design another one. It's an iterative process anyway. Like you can't be afraid to fail. One thing that some people find stressful, if they're already in design or maybe they're in a field that's creative, is UX design is all about getting feedback early and often. It's about sharing things that are sketchy because it's going to get better, and we know that. So you do have to be kind of brave to share your work early. This is something I'm always telling UX designers is like, you got to just put it out there. You can't take the things you know in your own head and design something for another person's head and get it right every time. You're going to have things that aren't translated. So that's why I would say definitely recommend you should get feedback early, often. Don't take it personal. Feedback on your designs is not feedback on you. Separate your work from you as a person. Understand that you are good and understand that you will get better. Do not worry about that. So yeah, of course, some people take it too personally. It can be a difficult field because everyone's got an opinion. Everyone wants to tell you how to do it. Just say thank you for that feedback. I'm going to take that into account and try and make the next version better. So yeah, it can be a little bit stressful when it comes to that. There are certain jobs, like people tend to leave developers alone. They don't bug them because no one understands what those letters mean on their screen. So yeah, I mean, if you don't like being bothered, there's fields like, development you can get into instead of design, where you can sort of be left alone. I think UI design, depending on the work, sometimes you can be left alone a little bit longer. But people have more of an opinion on the aesthetics than they do on the functionality, because you're just kind of innate. You kind of look at something and you automatically judge the aesthetics. Whereas sometimes people have strong opinions about the functionality, but that usually comes from people who are higher up in the process. They're better at communicating. So yeah, I think with UX design, it's good if you're proactively getting this sort of negative feedback. That kind of makes it feel a little bit better. But it can always feel bad when your only job is to make something functional and then people say, oh, it's not functional or it doesn't work. It can be kind of demoralizing. But yeah, the whole mindset and method is to get feedback and iterate. So don't worry about it too much. How would you factor in working in an agile environment, i.e. day-to-day processes like daily stand-up, scrums, and working in sprints? We do that. UX designers almost always do that. I think, as I said, UX design is a pretty collaborative role. So I would say overall that the more you do stand-ups, the more you have those sort of meetings, the more you share what you're doing, the easier your job's going to be. I mean, probably the hardest thing about UX design is like pushing people to give you feedback. It's not that like people give you negative feedback all the time and you walk around all depressed. It's like, hey, I think this is the right solution. What do you think? And then they don't respond or something, or like they don't have time to give you feedback. That's probably the most frustrating thing. So, I mean, UX designers, we love collaboration. We love, sharing our work. As I said, it can be hard sometimes at first, but, what we do is try and pull the right problem out of our team, try and get everyone to agree. Then we try and make sure that everyone agrees on the right solution. It's not that it's our solution. If you're a good UX designer, you're kind of pulling the solution from the room. This could be a way to think about things. But yeah, I think daily stand-ups are great. Those are, I don't know what I would do without them. All these agile processes are great. I mean, UX design works really well with agile. Obviously, We have to leave things a little more open. We have to be open to discovery. So sometimes our cards are a little more vague than a developer's cards, who might say, do this specifically and, blah, blah, blah. UX design can be a little bit more of an art than a science. So yeah, the cards look different, but all the agile stuff is necessary and encouraged with UX design. Any tips on transitioning to UX design as a graphic designer? For example, getting interview calls without relevant experience. Yeah, so there's this thing that a lot of designers do where they find a more marketable title and then they just give themselves that title. And if you don't get caught and get hired, the only thing you have to panic about is your first day in the job when you have to do UX design. So if you're a graphic designer and you say, hey, I'm a UX designer, that's the cool new term. Maybe you get hired, maybe you're good at selling yourself, or you're a good salesman and you get a job. You still have to know how to do UX design. The thing is, that'll get caught in the interview process. So you can't just say I'm a UX designer. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying like this is a thing that happens. So yeah, there's a certain list of criteria that goes along with being a graphic designer, and a different set of criteria that goes along with being a UX designer. And if I look at a graphic designer portfolio if I look at a graphic designer's portfolio and I can tell that there's a lot of UX work in there, I'm going to go they've sort of got a mix here. Like they're calling themselves a graphic designer, but I can see that they're doing things that are UX driven, so they could maybe do the job. More often, what's the case is you'll see someone who calls himself a UX/UI designer, and they're they're a graphic designer or a web designer, or they're only a UX designer or only a UI designer, and not both. A good manager can tell if you're being hired by a non-designer. Maybe they can't tell. It's possible, but yeah, I think the field's maturing, so it's getting to where you can spot these kind of things more easily. Yeah, depends on the company, but I think if you're a graphic designer looking to transition into UX, there's a ton to learn. You really have to understand all the things that go into making digital apps and products as opposed to things on pieces of paper. Like print design and graphic design is ages away from mobile design, because everything on that mobile screen is linked to another screen, and it's a super complicated process. I showed you that one screen where they're all linked here and there. It's just going to be difficult. Like when I took my bachelor, as I said, when I graduated with a bachelor's in graphic design, I knew how to do Illustrator. I knew some basics of art and design, layout, color theory, that kind of thing. And I knew how to use one tool. So that's not a lot. I think if I'd continued working in graphic design field, I might have gotten better at working with clients, maybe got better at branding, art direction, those kind of things. I didn't go down that path, so I don't know how helpful those things would be for UX design. From what I can tell, branding is a super helpful thing, no matter what kind of designer you are. Obviously, art direction is similar to that. But yeah, I think if you're a graphic designer, I'd recommend you learn a lot about being user-focused and learn a lot about new technologies. I was always kind of an early adopter type. I had every Nintendo system that was around. I had the Virtual Boy, that 3D thing. I was a big Apple fanboy. I was buying up all that stuff. Just interested in the technology is a helpful way to get into UX design if you're going to be working in technology. So yeah, you don't have to be interested in technology, but for me, that was how I bridged a lot of the things that I didn't know as a graphic designer. I was doing the graphic design work. I was doing posters for friends, but I was really interested in learning Photoshop. So I would try out a new Photoshop technique. I would be okay, I'm doing this poster for you for free, but I'm going to do a Star Wars style poster because I really want to learn how to do that kind of effect with the faces kind of half cut out and faded in and all the fire and laser. I would do stuff like that because I was interested in learning the technology of Photoshop and recreating a certain effect. So that's the bridge for me. Was I learned the graphic design kind of offline stuff in university, but I really wanted to learn the technology involved. And that technology involved in graphic design at the time was the same technology involved in UX UI design because we were all using Photoshop. So that was my bridge. Okay, still got questions coming in. I think we'll probably take questions until 15 more minutes, unless I'm told differently. This next question is, how many pieces should you have in your portfolio? Always get asked this. As someone starting out in UX design with no real industry experience, transitioning from graphic design. Okay, well, the graphic design changes my answer. So I'm going to answer like you didn't say that. I would say 3 to 6. I mean, as a person who's hired UX designers, I prefer to see one really good case study, because UX designers need to be telling stories. What does that mean? Case studies. I don't want to see a bunch of images with no text. Like, that means you're a graphic designer or a visual designer or maybe a UI designer. A UX designer needs stories. So find examples of good UX case studies online, steal that format, use that. I want to know the story of what you did. UX design is about process, like process and methods are what make good outcomes. Obviously the mindset, like be user focused, but what I want to see is like, do you have a design process you follow? I walked through one today that's super simple. Use that. So show me a portfolio piece that goes through discover, create, implement, 3 chapters, 3 headings, whatever. I'll be like, okay, cool. They understand the design process. Doesn't take much. I would just start describing your work, even if it's graphic design work. Describe it like that. I was doing a little bit of editorial design, which means like brochures, downloadable PDFs, that kind of thing. But when I put those projects on my portfolio, I was trying to get UX design work. So what I did was I talked about the process of creating that stuff. I tried to talk about the interactions that the audience would have on their iPad, making it, talking about the sort of app-like interactions, because it was a PDF, it was downloadable. So I showed it in the iPad. That's one thing you can do to make your graphic design work seem a little more digital. Just put the frame around it that's digital. But yeah, like try and find a good UX design process like the one I've laid out today, or maybe something that's like design thinking, and just tell the story of your work in that framework. That'll be helpful. The graphic design thing that I was going to mention is that you oftentimes have a lot more projects as a graphic designer because they're lightweight, quick. Like, one logo could be a project, but that could just be like 3 screens, and that could take you 1 day if you're fast. And then you might have like 20 of those. UX design is not like that. If I see 20 case studies for UX, I'm going to be like, why does this person need this job? Aren't they a freelancer? Like, this is a lot of work, because UX projects take something like 3 to 12 months usually. Sure, you can do certain parts of it quickly, but yeah. So I would see fewer projects, more detailed, more storytelling. I've got a Medium article I wrote on this called it's like UX designers need stories, not portfolios. I can't remember what it's called. Craft a story, not a portfolio. Yeah, so look at this article, craft a story, not a portfolio, on my Medium, and I've kind of talked through the storytelling aspects that are important for a portfolio, why you need them, what's different about them. This will be a nice gateway between graphic to UX design. So yeah, short answer, 1 really good case study. Long answer, 3 to 6 if you can. Yeah. I've noticed, we did research at CareerFoundry, even though the students had 2 really good portfolio pieces, they wouldn't apply to jobs until they had 3 for some reason. They just were blocked. It was like a mental block. Like, I won't apply to jobs until I have 3, which slowed them down, which caused them to be delayed in their job hunt. So just start applying to jobs when you have 1 portfolio piece. That'll help you. Okay. Next one. How important is it to have a design background for someone who is considering a career change? I'm guessing you mean a career change into UX design. I don't care as a person who hires. I think about the diversity of my team. Like, I want people who were graphic designers. I want people who were marketing, people. I want people who are product people. Like, I think it's helpful to have a variety of backgrounds. So I think it depends on the team. If you're a right fit, you can definitely, you should definitely sell your non-design background, because it can be a good thing. It's not like only the visual design type backgrounds are encouraged. I mentioned earlier that it's sometimes easier to get a job through your portfolio, but if you don't have a design background, you can get a job through talking to people more, you know? Like there's two ways to get a job: send someone a link and to describe what you do to them in person. The more effective way is to describe it in person anyway. So yeah, the portfolio is super important, but the portfolio gets you the interview. That's it. That's what the portfolio does. It shows that you can do the job, sure, but it gets you the interview. Once you get an interview, you're going to be describing what you do. You're going to be like showing off that you know your stuff just through talking, the way you present yourself, your confidence. You're talking about your work experience, what you want to do. So yeah, think about it like that. That's an opinion, of course, but everything I'm saying is my opinion, not CareerFoundry's. But yeah, I think portfolio pieces get you the job interview. Are agencies really willing to hire people that have just gone through a boot camp? Is it enough anymore? I mean, I'm a bit biased. I work for CareerFoundry. I think the way they teach makes sense. As I kind of hinted at earlier, it's not important what school you went to. So it's important your work history. So yes, getting that first job is very important, but that's not going to be based off your school. That's going to be based off your portfolio, maybe some past work. If you want to do some freelancing work after the boot camp, something like that is also an option. I can tell you what impresses people in tech is successful tech companies. So like, you know, there was a person where my first job, and he had an internship at Google. And of course, everyone is super impressed by it, and he got it, no problem. I didn't have any experience. I had a degree in graphic design, but that didn't help me at all. What helped me was the way I presented my work. Not the work itself, the way I presented my work. As you can see, it's not a typical field where you need like a certification. You must fulfill this check mark and this check mark. No, it's like, is this person passionate about it? Does this person know what they're doing? Does this person have a nice portfolio? I mean, the portfolio is both a blessing and a curse, because you can size up their talent and their skill and their experience really quickly. I can look at a portfolio piece in like 5 minutes and I can pretty much tell what's going on with this person. If I'm interviewing as a lawyer, they're going to check if I'm certified by the board, blah, blah, blah. You know, different professions have different ways of gauging whether someone can do the job. I like the portfolio. I'm from a visual background. Maybe that's why. If I didn't come from a visual background, again, I'd be really focusing on my in-person selling, my storytelling, talking about my background, my experience from another field and how I'd be perfect for the position, doing a lot of networking, maybe writing about UX design, you know, because the written word can go pretty far in UX design, just as far as the visual. So yeah, that's some of the things that I would think about if I was coming out of a boot camp. You're never going to find someone. I mean, you will find people who are like, ew, boot camps. You know, sure, you'll always find those people. Those people probably have a master's degree in something they didn't actually care about. There's like two mindsets there. So people who are sort of institutionalized at university and don't have any real world experience. And there's the other side who's like people who only have real world experience and they don't have any like sort of education. I think boot camps can fall on either side of that. A lot of times people think that boot camps only fall on the sort of real world experience because you come out of a boot camp with like a project-based thing, a portfolio. But CareerFoundry is kind of a mix there. We teach like a university, you know, we have like pretty rigorous process for creating our curriculum. It's a lot of it's like a university course online, and the way you approach it, we borrow a lot from the university model. Whereas if you go to something like a General Assembly 9-week course, it's pretty hard to really let that stuff sink in. CareerFoundry lasts like 6 to 12 months. So it's, I mean, my bachelor's degree at university, I did it for 1.5 years. So if you compact all that work into the style of a CareerFoundry course, it would be around 9 months as well. So there's really no different. It's just kind of the context and the way it's online. And so it is very similar to a university's approach. So yeah, I think we're kind of in the middle there. We teach a lot of UX research, which a lot of boot camps don't teach. You know, you can take your time, let it sink in. Still project-based learning, which I think is better than anything else. So yeah, that's my feelings on that. Does UX designer develop digital products only, such as apps and websites, etc.? No, they don't. Like I said, UX researchers, they might be just doing research, figuring out what's going on. Common UX research task would be like, should we move into this new market? There's a market in the Sahara Desert. Should we move there? Why don't you guys go and check out, learn from the people? Should we move into that? That's something UX researcher might do. So that's not a digital product there. It's more of a understanding around the digital product. A UX designer doesn't have to design just a product. That was the example I used in this webinar. But another example would be, let's see, maybe I wanted to design the interactions between the person driving the car and the person taking the car. So like, what's the sort of compensation model we're using? Let's get into some business stuff as well. Like, yeah, you're designing interactions a lot, interactions between people. Sometimes those take place on a digital phone. Sometimes they take place in real life. The UX designer can manage all of those. There's a field like you can basically specialize in the offline stuff, kind of facilitating workshops and co-creating. This is called service design. Very, very similar to UX design. It's probably good to learn UX design first, actually, and then move into service design. So if you really don't like apps, you really don't like digital stuff, you can do a UX design course from CareerFoundry and then get into like workshops and facilitating in person, hosting, co-creating, stuff like that. Those are kind of hard to learn online, obviously, because you can do that with tools. So you're gonna struggle to find a good course online, but you can definitely learn from experience and pivot from UX design into service design pretty easily. If we're unsure about choosing between UX and UI, do you suggest we study both? Yes, I do. If you're unsure about which one you're into, it means you probably will like both. That's what I'm feeling. I still like UI. I get super excited by a really nice looking UI. I don't care how it works sometimes. I'm just like, that looks cool. That makes me feel something. That makes me feel a way. So yeah, I like both. I like UX design better, but that's my opinion. Yeah, I love working with UI designer. It's so nice because we just take care of different parts of it. But most small companies, you're probably going to do both. The bigger the company, the more specializations you'll find, the more siloed things will get. But yeah, I think if you're talking about the order, I would recommend, that's tricky, because I did UI design before UX design, but I had to do a lot of reading and writing actually about UX to really get it. I wish I'd had a boot camp that didn't really exist, or at least I didn't really know about it at the time. So I learned UI before UX. That's good and bad. Sometimes I jump to the UI instead of thinking about the UX. I've really had to train my UX like reflexes just to not do that. So that was difficult. Even if I started with UX, I still would have wanted to learn some UI, just because I want to be able to do it on my own if I have to. I know I probably won't be the best person at it. Like on my team, I'm definitely not the best person at UI right now by far, but I still like doing it sometimes. I still want to be able to do it. I just think it gives you more flexibility, allows you to break up the variance at work. I think you should study both. Eventually, the question of which one you want to start with, totally up to you. I'd start with the job market. If you want to get a job in UI UX, check the city where you want to get a job at. Are there more UI jobs, more UX jobs? Do it based on that because you want to make sure you can get a job at the end of the day. Okay, next question. I think we have two more. With all the interest in UX, do you think there will ever be an oversaturation of folks in the industry? I like that you said folks. Maybe at some point. I mean, especially after COVID-19. I mean, the tech companies did really well. The people that worked at tech companies, their lives weren't as affected. They could work from home. They didn't suffer as much. So I think in the short term, the near term, I see tech growing. Obviously, there was like the .com burst of 2001 when everything tanked. This could happen again, sure, but in reality, you'd be hard pressed to find a company that didn't have some sort of digital aspect to it these days, and you'd also be hard pressed to find a company that didn't have some sort of like application involved. So there's a really great quote that I love from Jeff Goldfluff. He wrote Lean UX along with another guy, with Josh Sadin. He also wrote Sense and Respond. Really good writer on like the impact of UX in work and its relation to other roles. He writes a lot about agile and UX. So I definitely recommend Lean UX as a book to get into that. He says, today every company is a tech company. And I know that's kind of like something you might hear a tech person say, but it's true if you think about it. Like grocery stores have an app. Pizza Hut has a really great app. Sorry, maybe it's Domino's. All these companies are sinking a lot of time into these things. And actually, like, what's super interesting about, like, say Berlin, for example, you've got Volkswagen, right? So Volkswagen, I don't know if you call them a like digital design company, tech company, whatever. Well, guess what Volkswagen does with their extra money? They have a digital lab in Berlin where they do basically a startup incubator. They just design startups around kind of mobility because they know they'll make money off these things. They have extra money, so they're investing in it. You find that story all over the place. I mean, if you're debating different designs, you're going to have much better job security, in my opinion, to do something like UX, UI, or product design. Product design, by the way, I have a slide to that. I've been talking about product design. I'll show you here. Yeah, here's a lot of the design roles. This is something I made for the Fountain Institute. Kind of just gives you the top 5 titles. That discover, create, implement thing I talked about earlier, the 3 main steps of my design process. That's here at the bottom. So you can see you go from left to right. You can see where these sort of different designs are done. So UX design starts a little earlier. Product design starts a little later. UX and UI are kind of both included in product design. So yeah, you can see there like the kind of crossovers. This is a super helpful thing to help you understand the different roles. But yeah, those are the different roles that you can have. I would say it's a pretty future-proof career. I've been able to work from home the past 3 months, so yeah. Anyway, that's all the time we have for now. I'm sorry. If you have any questions that I haven't answered, please connect with one of our program advisors. When this session ends, you'll be taken to a booking screen. You can talk to one of these program advisors about becoming a professional UX designer and using exactly the skills that we learned today. You can do these kind of things on a daily basis. If you're excited by this, it's something you can do as a job. The thing that you can do with the program advisor is you can talk one-on-one about your life, your career. It's a casual chat. There's no obligations. It's free. They do this for a living. I recommend you do it because if you thought UX could possibly be a thing, this is a really good way to try it on. And if you never tried it out, you'll never know if it was something you'd be interested in. So yeah, you'll get a follow-up email a bit later with more links and the recording itself. So you can always have that. But as soon as this is over, then you can go to book a call with the program advisor. So I really appreciate your attention. Y'all have been really great, and I really appreciate these questions. And thanks so much for being with me today.